The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is day 3 of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in July 2019. It seems like just yesterday we had another sesshin, and it's almost the case. We had a June sesshin, then we had the Regaining Balance retreat for women veterans, this one an advanced retreat for women veterans with PTSD, and then 2 days later, here we are again. But then, we never know how long our life will be, and if we really yearn to be free, we're willing to do a great deal, whatever it takes to reach that place. I was thinking about a time when I came back from being in Japan, arrived at the airport in San Francisco, and the plane was late, and it was an international plane, and so there were quite a few people who missed their connections. In fact, there were 200 and some people that missed their connections. And we were all waiting in line at the counter to be rebooked. And something really touched me, because the people that were working the counter, they ran out of time. Their shift was ending. They didn't leave. They stayed and helped the new people continue to get all those people processed onto new flights. It was really heartwarming to see. It's something that one would expect to see in terms of senior people who would be doing Buddhist practice, that when the need arises, people respond. Doesn't matter if it's their shift or not, they respond. To have low enough ego that we are able simply to give ourselves generously is a sign of some significant level of practice. So today I would like to continue sharing with you the words of Huangpo, Obaku in Japanese, who was an incredible, deeply realized Chan teacher, Chan being the Chinese way of pronouncing jhana, which is the original Sanskrit term that means meditation, and became Zen in Japan and Son in Korea. So I'm sharing from a book called A Bird in Flight Leaves No Traces. A bird in flight leaves no traces. And yesterday we spoke about how the many different ways we can leave traces. We can leave clutter behind us. We can not get out of the way when we do need to be out of the way for something else to happen. But our thoughts, our ideas are amazing. It had an interesting experience at Sogenji with that. I was Jisharyo. And in those days, the Jisharyo was the person who ended the Sanzen at the appropriate time. This was not during a sesshin that I recall. I think it was just during a regular day. And at the end of Sanzen, we'd go back to the breakfast table, or go to the breakfast table from the Zendo. And I could see that we were getting close to time when the Sanzen should be ended. And I could also see that the next person in line was one who would normally take quite a long time, and which would run the Roshi 15-20 minutes into breakfast. And so I ended it before that person went to Sanzen. And it was amazing, the eruption in the Kohojo, where we wait for Sanzen, of the remaining people, including the person who would not get in and had assumed that they would. No one spoke a word, but the energy of thought was amazing. It was as if there was a whole uproar going on. This is another way of leaving traces. Another way of leaving traces. And apologize for the background noise. That's the blinds banging against the window in the wind. We have a choice either to sit with the windows completely closed, or and roast, or to endure some banging. I hope it's okay. At any rate, we leave traces in many, many ways, and it's a rare person who is able simply to seamlessly move in the moment and be there, and also be so aware that when it's clear that someone needs help, for example, that they respond. Most of us carry around a whole bag full of thoughts, ideas, ruminations, fragments of conversation or bits of poetry or song. Yet to be able to be profoundly silent within allows one to be infused by the sunshine, the subtle sounds of nature, the crickets or the birds, the feeling of the soft wind on our faces. And these become miracles when we are able to experience that without a head full of ideas and thoughts and subconscious rumblings. Those ideas and thoughts and subconscious rumblings are a result of our conditioning. We were told many times over, as we were growing up, various things about ourselves, and we tend to internalize those. The voice of our father or mother or a teacher or a grandparent or a neighbor or the boyfriend or girlfriend or somebody whose interactions with us were often challenging, that would really fix it in place. And we adopt those words for ourselves, and we repeat them to ourselves. If we've experienced challenging times in our life, including trauma, but even ordinary challenging times where we've been chastised, and it hurts to be chastised, then the next time something happens and it appears that we may be chastised again, we often will punish ourselves, because the stress of waiting for that outward negative comment or whatever is so great that it just produces so much tension that it's easier to punish ourselves, get it over with. So we live a life of considerable inner dialogue, and that inner dialogue prevents us from really living life, from unfolding the joy of being able to be totally freely present, freely respond to circumstances, whether they're negative or positive. In our Zen practice, we're called upon to reach deep within ourselves. And for any of us who have experienced trauma, that can be very challenging. We're highly invested in going a certain way in and stopping before the pain, before the terror, before the trauma. It's as if, reminds me of living in Thailand, in Southeast Asia in general, or in Asia in general. When you're in conversation with somebody, you may be best friends with that person, but if you're not an Asian, if you're not part of the culture, you're allowed in to a certain point and no further. it's as if there's an invisible wall erected. I've experienced this myself, and I've heard it over and over and over and over again. It's a characteristic of the Asian cultures that there's a wall behind which is quite private. In America during the 50s, it was similar to, at least in my family. And on a very tiny level, but very significant level, it's that way within each one of us if we have experienced trauma in particular, because trauma is horrifying, terrifying, and impacts our brain in ways that can cause it to recycle. And regardless of that, we usually respond, in fact react, by shutting it down, by compartmentalizing it, especially if it happened when we were children. We deny its existence at some level, and yet the experience is locked in our body. And unfortunately, when we get to Zen practice, often we're drawn deeply to Zen practice because of these experiences. We can only go so far in our practice before we hit that wall that says, no entrance, private. And it's bolted and chained. And has high, high walls with concertina wire on top. And yet, if we are truly to become free, that hidden experience, the energy of that hidden experience needs to be worked with. Otherwise, it provides a barrier. And we can't go beyond a certain point in coming to true awakening. Yet, there are many, many ways for people to work with trauma, even within the context of meditation. We have a program for women veterans with PTSD. And in this most recent retreat, the advanced retreat, it was most heartening to see how these women, whom we know now pretty well because they've been to several of our retreats, and to see how they have progressed into increasing levels of ease, joy, and freedom in their lives, despite the fact that they've had multiple traumas. What we have learned is that at least our population that come to our regaining balance retreats is that most of these women, if not all of them, have had trauma in childhood. There are horrific stories of what they've experienced as children. And often what they've done is join the military to escape a dreadful situation at home. And then, because of the subculture in the military, which is one of which women are, at least in certain quarters, devalued, they are traumatized in the military as well. Multiple rapes, and so on and so forth. And so it re-traumatizes them, and PTSD becomes what they have to daily experience. And yet, through the tools that they have gained through these retreats, and also through the work they've done as well, most of them have been in therapy, which is basically essential. And it's heartening. Now, for people who have experienced such hardcore, ongoing trauma, I think of someone who we encountered briefly, whose father sexually abused her until she was 4 years old, from infancy on. And then her mother kicked him out of the house. But she continued to abuse this girl. Cigarette burns on her arms, torture. And she was so terribly traumatized that it was going to be virtually impossible for her to do meditation, because there needed to be a whole lot of extra work in order to be able to open gently to the physical experience, the felt sense. We don't necessarily have to remember what happened, but there's an energy in our body that tends to be jagged, although for each person it may vary. And for this person, even to open to that much was going to be overwhelming for that person, and so she really was not a candidate for Zen practice. But those of you who find yourself in this Zendo at this time have done significant work in that direction. Those of you who have experienced trauma, and most of us have, if not all of us. But there is still that major climb that has to be accomplished, certainly not all at once, but gradually over time, titrating the experience of the terror or the anxiety. And what happens when we are able to do that with guidance is that we come little by little more and more free. We're able to breathe deeply, or our muscles are able to relax fully, increasingly fully. We're able to walk through life with less tension, less anxiety, less fear. And eventually, if we go deep enough, a level of freedom that is phenomenal. This is all possible in our Zen practice. But, as I was mentioning to one person recently, we have to be willing to swim with the alligators for a while in order to move through that massive barrier. There's a time when we are really swimming through a terrible swamp, and it seems like it's endless, and it seems like it's crazy making and all kinds of dreadful things. But with guidance and the support of the Sangha, if we do it, if we're willing to go through that, freedom, the most amazing freedom, unfolds. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. Before that, we live encapsulated in a protective covering that limits our access to life with a capital L. Huang Po points to a deep level of realization. And here in this chapter, the mind that is originally pure, this is our own mind, this is our true nature, originally pure. And I would add undefilable. It's impossible to defile that mind. No matter what we go through, it can't attach itself to this profound beingness that we are. This pure mind, the original font, whether in sentient beings or all the Buddhas, whether in the mountains or rivers of the world, whether endowed with characteristics or free of characteristics, in all cases it pervades all realms in the 10 directions, utterly equanimous. It has no characteristics of self or other. We shared this with you yesterday, but it's worth repeating today. Our true nature. This is what we yearn to return to. At some level, we have a sense of it. We know how precious it is to become free, even if we don't know that freedom now. And we yearn for it. And we can reach it. We can open to it through the practice. Giving ourselves over and over again as fully as possible. And of course, there's going to be times when we can't do it as fully as we might otherwise be possible. But we persist. We persist. This is why one of the 3 pillars of Zen is basically great stubbornness, tenacity, to continue to dig even in the midst of whatever else is trying to get you off that digging. To sink deep within, beyond words, in search, in wordless search, because words can't find it. They can't even really aptly describe it. These words, they're translated by Robert Buswell, who was a monk in a Korean Son tradition and is now a professor at UCLA. It's the best that anybody can do. But the reality is who we really are. The true nature of reality is beyond description. We can try, but that's not it. Yet freedom lies with experiencing this true nature. When people of this world hear that all the Buddhas transmit the mind Dharma, they assume there's a discrete Dharma that can be realized and acquired with reference to the mind. They then seek the Dharma with the mind, not knowing that the mind is nothing but that Dharma, and that Dharma is nothing but the mind. You cannot seek the mind with the mind. If you try, the day of your attainment will never come, even after millions of kalpas. We can't think our way to it. It is better to maintain no mind here and now. This is the original Dharma. It is like a wrestler unaware that there's a jewel on his forehead, who looks everywhere for it outside, even though he travels through the 10 directions in search of it. He's never able to find it. But as soon as a wise person points to it, he sees for himself that the jewel was there the entire time. Therefore, if you practitioners of the way are deluded about your own original mind and don't recognize that it is the Buddha, you will seek it outside and engage in various practices relying on a graduated process of realization. Even if you diligently look for it in this manner over successive kalpas, you will never achieve the way. It is better to maintain no mind here and now. That sounds a little bit discouraging. You won't find it in infinite kalpas, and yet it's right here. What is this no mind? It's about dropping beneath the level of our thoughts, our ideas, and in particular, our self-image, into we don't know what. It can be unsettling, this dropping deep within. There can be anxiety coming up. There's a metaphor for this. Let go your hold on the cliff and drop, hands held high into the fiery abyss. That's what it can feel like. And so we get so far in our practice, and then we are like the mosquito trying to bite the iron ball, or trying to climb a silver mountain or a mountain of glass. We seem to be trying, and we are trying, but it feels like we're getting nowhere. And finally, when we give up trying to get somewhere and relax into letting go, that's when we can recognize our face before our parents were born. Know with certainty that all dharmas originally are non-existent and unascertainable. There's nothing on which to rely and nothing in which to abide. There's no subject and no object. If you do not arouse deluded thoughts, you will realize Bodhi. Bodhi is enlightenment. It's a challenge to reach that place because we are so invested in our assumption about being somebody. We see this at a major level, a caricature really, at basically the top level of our country. We are invested in this self-image, and yet it keeps us prisoner. It takes courage to let it go. And initially, upon letting it go, can feel like, oh my God, there's no ground under me. How am I going to function? And yet, we have an inbuilt ability to function regardless of circumstance. And that ability comes to the fore when we quit trying to make things happen the way we want them to happen. On the one hand, we have where we are at this point. On the other hand, we have our incredible potential to truly be free, and we yearn to be free. But in order to get there, it takes great bravery, as Hakuin used to say. It takes courage to dare to step out into the middle of nowhere. But when we do that, we'll learn to fly. And then, whatever the circumstances are, we'll be able to respond to them in accurate ways. We won't be caught in a rigid straitjacket of how we have to be or how it has to be. The greatest freedom in the universe is the freedom to let go who we think we are. And the freedom that comes forth from that. And it is available. You can reach it. You can experience it. And it's worth it. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.